Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russell Holden. I'm with RenderPlus Systems, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for this introduction to ArielVision. Before we get started with some examples, what I'd like to do is mention just a few things. First of all, we're going to record this webinar, and so once we're finished, I'll upload the video to the RenderPlus Systems channel on YouTube. If you haven't visited the RenderPlus Systems channel on YouTube yet, it's a pretty good idea to take a look at the videos that are published there. Several experts in our rendering software have uploaded videos that I think you'll find very informative and very helpful as you're working to become an expert on our photorealistic rendering software. It's also important for you to know that we don't know specifically how you use SketchUp in your office. And so today I'm going to use two models. One of them you can see on the screen. This is just a little wooden table. That's going to get us started with making a couple of nice renderings. And then afterwards we'll move to something a little bit more complicated, a model of a house. And we're going to have a lot of fun with that model and showing you some of the really nice features that are included in ArielVision. In both of the examples, I'm going to use some features that might not be so obvious when you're just getting started, but hopefully with what I'm going to show you, you'll gain some information that'll help you create some really nice renderings fast. This is a no experience required event, so if you've just installed ArielVision and you're testing it out, or if you're looking for some information on why you might choose ArielVision as your renderer, you've come to the right place. I'm hoping you will feel comfortable asking questions as we go through the software. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the question board and answer them as they come in. If I get a little behind, bear with me. I'll keep checking back, and if we have to back up in the webinar, that's fine. And then lastly, there are times when you might find that I'm speaking a little fast. If that's true, just type in the word fast as a question. I won't answer that question specifically, but that will prompt me that I'm speaking too fast. And, okay, Russell, are you talking because I can't hear you? So, interesting. If anyone else can't hear, please let me know. I see that my microphone's working fine on my end. So I have a question that just says, are you talking because I can't hear you? So let me just answer this, that I am speaking and everyone else appears to be able to hear me. And then I'll tell you what, I'm going to probably just yammer here for a second so that we can give our friend a chance to figure out what's going on their end. And that was David asking, or no, David says it's good. Okay. At any rate, if I am speaking too fast while we're going through this information, type the word fast in the question box. And that's going to just remind me that I might need to slow down just a little bit. And I mention that for those of you in particular out there who might not be native speakers of English. I know that some of us tend to speak a little quickly. Now I'll tell you what, I'm going to trust that Stan is going to figure out the speakers on his end. And Stan, when you do, if you'd let us know, that would be great. Otherwise, this might be a silent webinar for you. Now what I have on the screen is SketchUp up and running. ArielVision is also loaded. If you're using the trial version, you may find that you need to click Extensions in the SketchUp window. And when you click Extensions, an option that you'll see is ArielVision. So Extensions is right here. Click it. ArielVision will be included on the drop-down list. It'll specifically say ArielVision Load. and that'll load the software for you. You'll get this menu. Once we have a model from SketchUp loaded in SketchUp, the thing for you to understand is that models are ready to render. So click Render, which is this nice green button, and that brings up this dialog. This is a dialog that is very important to your use of ArielVision. Across the top are 5 lighting presets. Now, lighting preset is actually really straightforward. All that it means is we set up lighting so that you can click Start Rendering and you won't end up with a black screen. Now, for this table, I'm going to show you a lighting preset that it may not be so obvious what this preset is. This one is called Studio High Dynamic. And here's what it means. This is the equivalent of taking this table to a photographer studio. And this diagram shows you what a professional photographer might do in order to create nice photographs of your table. Set up lighting around the room, set up reflectors, all of these nice things, and the result is that he'll create photographs for you that are professional photographs of your object. So with Studio High Dynamic Lighting, when we render this object, and we do that by clicking Start Rendering, we get this image of the table. Notice below the table all of the subtle shadows from the various lights that are pointed at this table. Now this is a pretty nice rendering, and one of the things that I want to really impress upon everyone this afternoon is that the first factor in creating a photorealistic rendering is to select a material that's photoreal. What I'm not satisfied with regard to this table is the finish of the wood. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about what finish means in photorealistic rendering. Here we are back in SketchUp. I'm going to right-click on this tabletop. And when I do, I get this pop-up menu. I'm going to use an ArielVision function called Re-Edit Material, which brings up this pop-up menu. Now, this menu shows finish options for this material, in this case specifically wood, and one of them is reflective. So we select reflective and then re-render the table. Now the difference is quite striking. Studio High Dynamic Lighting preset is giving us a sample of our table and how the material will behave in bright light, right here, in filtered light all across the table, and in shadow. The benefit is that by bringing my object by itself, in this case this table, into an empty SketchUp model, and then testing it with Studio High Dynamic Lighting, now when I take this table into an actual model and perhaps include 10 or 100 of these tables in the model, I have a very good idea of how this material will behave in virtually any lighting condition. And so I'm pretty well assured that I'm going to get a nice photorealistic rendering of this table when I use it in a model. So the two factors we've talked about so far that are very important in photorealistic rendering are the quality of the material image that you use, and then paying a lot of attention to the actual finish of that material on your object. Now let's move on to a project that's going to be a little bit more complex and more interesting. This is the direction that I'm going to head with this house model. And here's where it starts. A house model created in SketchUp that when we render it, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a rendering of this house model, and the lighting preset that we're going to select is exterior with sun. So obviously we're outside of this building. With sun means that shadows are going to be cast by the SketchUp sun location. Click Start Rendering, and here's what we get. Now already there are several things that are accomplished in this rendering that are not possible with SketchUp. For example, the windows are actually reflecting the SketchUp sky. Now in this case, it's the default clear blue SketchUp sky. It's a nice sky, but it's not particularly interesting, and so the reflections, although they are correct, they are also not all that interesting. So let's improve this rendering. We're going to click on the Rendering Settings dialog, and this is just another way to get to the Lighting Presets menu in ArielVision. The one that I'd like to select is High Dynamic Range Image, HDRI. We're going to use an HDRI image as the sky and the background for our model. A much more convincing rendering of this project. Now you'll notice that the reflections include clouds from our HDRI sky. HDRI sky backgrounds is a high-end feature of ArielVision. Every part of the HDRI sky is actually casting light on our model. Typically, the brightest spot in the sky is the sun location, and so that'll have a major influence over shadows. But the clouds in this sky as well are casting light on our model. And so the bright areas of the clouds are casting more light than the dark areas of the clouds. Every point across the screen, and actually in a 360-degree rotation around our building, is casting light on this model. And so the shadows are much more subtle, and the lighting will change from the top to the bottom of a wall depending on how the light is being cast. We are getting a very subtle shadow here, for example, underneath this overhang. A much more realistic rendering of this project just by using HDRI sky. You can go onto the internet and you can pick any panoramic image that you find, and then you are able to use the image that you find as an HDRI sky. The one that I'm using is the default in the software. So far, we've talked about the use of materials and the importance of finishes, and we've introduced now the topic of lighting and how important lighting is on creating a photorealistic rendering of a SketchUp model. So now let's introduce some artificial lighting of our own and improve the quality of our rendering, and frankly, I think improve the curb appeal of this building. I'm going to back up one slide. The dialog that I'm going to display next is the Render Ready dialog. And just as the name implies, every component available in this library is render ready. That means with regard to light fixtures have bulbs installed, and those bulbs are ready to cast light on our model. Now, I'm not going to camp on this dialog for too long, but I do want to point out a couple of interesting features. The first is that there are a wide variety of lights and at the end mirrors available on this dialog. I'm picking one from the street light category, a light that I just want to hang on the wall of our building. I've set the brightness of this light to 100 watts. And I think the most important aspect of the light that I'm going to place is I've actually specified a color. And I've done that because the bulb in here I consider to be an incandescent bulb. And as you all know, incandescent bulbs are not white. They're in fact more along the lines of amber. I'm exaggerating the color just a little to make a point in this rendering. And I'm going to place a couple of them. So once you've filled out this menu, and I think you'll all agree, there's actually very little that we have to be concerned with. Which light, what color is it, how bright is it, are we placing one or more? Once you're satisfied, create place. Here's the first light I've just attached to the wall. This is using the normal SketchUp routine of clicking near the wall and it'll stick to the wall. Here's a second one. Now, I do have one more light fixture that I placed earlier. It's just a ceiling light underneath this porch. It's also it's the same color and it's specified at 100 watts. Now let's render this building. And what I'm hoping is that immediately you appreciate the importance of the color of the lighting from an artificial light. Because what we've just accomplished is we have warmed the materials on our building considerably. Now they're no longer neutral gray. They're warmed up very nicely by this artificial lighting. And I believe it's a much more attractive building as a result. ArielVision includes some very interesting features that allow you to enhance the completed rendering without having to start over. And by starting over, I mean, of course, returning to SketchUp, making some adjustments, and then committing your computer to a completely new rendering. For example, this is the tone operator dialog. Now, for the lighting that we just added, another thing that we can do to enhance our rendering is maybe dim the overall rendering slightly. So currently the brightness is set at 50%. By lowering it to 45, I've got a much more dramatic rendering. The contrast is still quite good, and the lighting from our artificial lights is even warmer now. So here's the image before, very nice, and here's the image after dimming just slightly. So I've got nice warm lights on my building, and I've moved from more of a daylight example of our project to an evening example of our project, all from one rendering. Anytime that you have a rendering that you're satisfied after manipulating a completed rendering, just click the Save button up here that I'm pointing to, and you can save the rendering in a number of popular formats, including PNG and JPEG. So once a rendering is completed, it might be very beneficial to use things like the tone operator to adjust the rendering, and in some cases, from one rendering, create multiple renderings for your presentation. Now let's move around to the back of the building, because in addition to lighting, another very important aspect of ArielVision is the ability to make materials reflective. So here we are at the back of the building, and I added a gazing ball to the patio. When we click on it, we get this pop-up that you've already seen before. We used this on the table. I want to edit the material of that gazing ball. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this gazing ball behave like a mirror. Now again, mirror just means that the finish of the gazing ball is highly polished. When we render, here's the gazing ball. So I have now very nice reflections. Look at the reflections in this glass on the patio door. Very nice reflections of the windows showing the sky, and now a very complicated reflection on a sphere. In this case, the example is a gazing ball. So what we've looked at in this very, very fast introduction is the use of, in ArielVision, the use of studio high dynamic lighting to sample a model, and from that sample create a photorealistic rendering. Now here obviously I embellished a little bit more by adding a nice vase with some flowers and a newspaper, and this is still using that studio high dynamic lighting. Then we moved on to a building example. In this case, when I created more of an evening scene, one more thing that I did to this model was I lowered the color saturation. I'm going to back up a few slides and show you. Sorry to do this so painfully here. Notice that at the bottom of this menu of the tone operators, there's also saturation. I think when people make computer renderings, one of the things they frequently overlook with regard to nighttime images is that when there is low light, that means there is less light bouncing off of surfaces, and therefore colors tend to be a bit more gray. Probably a great example of this is when you walk into your living room at night and the lights are low, and you'll notice that all of the brightly colored things in your room the colors are pretty subdued. And so in this rendering, it is down to 45% brightness for the overall rendering, and then I lowered the saturation of color down to 70%, much more gray than it was before. Remember, what I'm after is using ArielVision to create photorealistic renderings of a project. Another thing that we didn't explore is that, and I must admit, this is not my project. This is a model that's from our warehouse, and I didn't build it. But when I rendered it the first time, I noticed that the siding and the wood siding and then this shake siding is exactly the same color, and they were in SketchUp, in a SketchUp rendering, being treated exactly the same way. In ArielVision, what I did was I modified this material, and in rendering, I included an automatic bump map. The automatic bump map has a very nice effect in the rendering, because what it does, and I'm going to go try to jump back to a slide here. What you'll notice is that by using automatic bump map, even though this actually is just a picture of shingles, but I get up here a much more convincing some 3D relief on these shingles, because the primary difference between the shingles and the siding is that this is a textured surface, this is really more of a flat surface. Everyone has been really, really quiet, and I'm wondering if there are any questions about the information we've covered. Okay, Bill has a question, and his question is the only thing that you needed to do on the gazing ball was change reflection? And the answer is yes. This gazing ball was loaded straight from the SketchUp 3D warehouse. And because SketchUp doesn't do reflections, if we would render this without modifying the gazing ball, it would be a very nicely rendered white sphere sitting on top of the pedestal. The only thing that we needed to do was modify the material, which was incidentally just the color white, and specify that everywhere that white material occurs in this gazing ball is going to behave like a mirror. That's all we did, and then clicked render. And the result is a gazing ball behaving the way it should. Are there any other questions? Okay, I have a question about the Studio High Dynamic Lighting. So I'm going to go back to the table rendering here. The way that this actually works is we have lighting set up as though the sun is filtering down through to the table through a canopy of trees. And so it is an HDRI sky image that we're using, and every part of that sky image is actually casting light on our model. Some of it, as I mentioned before, some of it filtered, some of it pretty well in shadow, and then some of it directly from the sun shining on our table. Anyone else? Now, I want to mention that we have 2 more webinars scheduled that you may find interesting. One of them is specifically focused on lighting, and the intention is to help you go from lighting novice to lighting expert within about an hour. It's going to be very interesting, and it's going to be very detailed with regard to adding lights to a model, specifying the various types of lights that are available for ArielVision, and of course using the light fixtures, artificial lighting, to create a photorealistic rendering. The other topic is regarding reflections, because reflections in ArielVision are, there's a lot more flexibility with regard to managing reflections than you might imagine. For example, well, let me put it this way. In reality, as you probably know, everything is reflective. So in this model at the bottom showing grass, the grass actually is reflecting light, and that light is being bounced off of the other surfaces in our model. There's light hitting this wall, light is being reflected off of that wall, and it's hitting other surfaces. It's adding to the brightness of those surfaces, and the light is in return bouncing off of those walls back off of those surfaces back onto this one. Which brings up one other thing that I'd like to show you. When you are, once you've established a lighting preset, so for example, exterior with sun, that means the sun is turned on, the sky is turned on, we're ready to render. Now add as many artificial lights to your model as you want. Below is the render image size. This means when ArielVision renders your image for you, it'll render a width in pixels and the height in pixels that you specify. The larger the rendered image, the longer it will take to create the rendering. And this in particular is a feature of ArielVision that you want to manage very carefully, because an image that is 2 times bigger than this, for example 1800 by whatever that is, 11, can't do the math quick enough, sorry. Anyway, twice as big as this rendering will take at least 4 times longer to render, maybe more. Far more important to the quality of the rendering is the number of passes. Because with each successive pass, the lighting for your model is refined. That is particularly true with regard to bounced lighting. Light from a fixture hitting a wall, bouncing off the wall, hitting the floor, hitting the other walls in the room, and now another pass, and the lighting gets refined even more. There is more to be gained from a rendering where you have specified 200 passes at low resolution than there is from a rendering where you specified 2000 pixels wide at 50 passes. You'll want to experiment with this, because the 200 pass medium resolution rendering will complete much faster and be of a higher quality than a high resolution image with a lower number of passes. Did that spark any questions from anyone? I think usually people get concerned about, I have a question about printing, and I think it's a very good question. A lot of times people are very inclined towards high resolution images because they intend to make a hard copy. It's important to keep in mind that modern printers and modern print drivers do an unbelievable job of blending colors and creating printouts that are absolutely spectacular, and many of them on virtually any type of paper. One of the keys to creating a nice printout of a photorealistic rendering is typically to remember that what you see on the screen is not going to match what you see on the paper, because when I'm looking at a rendering on the screen, it's being illuminated from behind. And of course, when that rendering hits the paper, it's only being lit from above. The experiments that I like to do, and this is generally from one printer to another because not all are going to behave the same. Brighten the image. It won't look great on the screen, but it'll look really nice on the printed paper. Usually brightening an image somewhere between 5 and 15% is sufficient, but again, depending on your printer, that number is probably going to vary. Brightening the image can be done in a variety of ways. You can certainly take a finished JPEG image over to your favorite imaging program. Most people use Photoshop and brighten the image there. What I'd like you to keep in mind is that when you know that you intend to create hard copies of your renderings, brighten them up in, and perhaps you've experimented enough where you know the answer to the question, how much brighter does the image need to be for a good hard copy? Brighten the image real quick in ArielVision, save it as my favorite exterior image for printing 1, and then save also your computer copy of the image at a lower brightness for your presentation. That was a long-winded answer on printing. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up? Well, again, I appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. This was intended as a no experience required introduction to ArielVision, hopefully encouraging you to open up a SketchUp model, and before you do anything else, just click Render. Take a look at the result and then start playing around with all of the various options that you have available to you to enhance the quality of the rendering for the materials. Don't forget, everything is reflective. Most things are not as mirror-like as mirrors. And take a look at features like automatic bump maps. They do quite a lot. This stone, when you put a bump map on this stone, it becomes much more realistic looking in a rendering. Mostly, open a model, click Render, have fun. I hope you have good luck with ArielVision, make great presentations, and go out and win a lot of business. Thanks again. I'll be uploading this recording, the recording of this webinar, to our RenderPlus Systems YouTube channel very shortly. I'd also like to let you know that beginning probably the first part of next week, keep a close eye on your mailbox, because you'll receive a couple of emails from us, and I can assure you they're going to be worth reading. So look for those beginning early next week. Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you real soon at another one of our webinars.